Chapter 1. The Shadows of Assur. In a back alley, on the edge of the artisan's quarter, lived a young man named Zabani, son of a widowed potter and a priestess who died too soon in a plague epidemic. His name, which meant, the one who escapes by the will of Assur, seemed prophetic. From an early age he had learned to sneak among the shadows and survive unseen, a shadow among others in the city of the god. His home was a one-room hut, with mud walls and a roof of dried reeds. The floor was beaten, and in the corner a small sesame oil wick always burned, the only source of light in the long evenings. His father, Nur-Elam, spent his days shaping vessels for temples and markets, while Zabani had learned to borrow from those who were too allot. Their table often included a stew of lentils or millet, served in a single clay pot for all to eat on good days. When they sold a well-painted pot, they also allowed themselves dried tiger fish, dates, or a steaming flatbread from the neighborhood's communal oven. One warm evening, as the moon rose palely over the ziggurat's towers, Zabani planned a new theft. He had heard rumors of a shipment of jewelry that was to be temporarily stored in the house of a palace official in Adambel, a corrupt scribe who took bribes on behalf of the king. The theft was carried out quickly. Zabani crept onto the roof of the house, silently cut a mat, and entered the room where the filigree gold necklaces and bracelets lay. But as he was leaving, a patrol spotted him. He was forced to flee through the empty stalls of the market, slipping through the courtyards and passages until, unexpectedly, he came close to the inner garden of the royal palace, where no commoner was allowed to tread. Hidden in the myrtle bushes, his heart pounding, he caught sight of Princess.Mullissu for the first time, a teenage girl with ebony eyes, the daughter of King Idun-Sin and Queen Tashmetu, a woman renowned for her beauty and cruelty. The princess held a small harp in her hands, and around her stood a few silent maids. Zabani looked at her for a moment, and in that look a crazy thought was born, not just to steal from the powerful, but to penetrate their world, into the very heart of power. But heavy footsteps were approaching. Guards patrolled close. With bated breath, Zabani slipped back into the darkness, but not before a gold bracelet fell from her cloak, remaining hanging from a wild rose branch, right under the eyes of a maid. That bracelet would trigger, without him knowing, a discreet hunt. The palace had been touched by the shadow of a thief, and Zabani's world would change forever. Zabani was running. The darkness of the palace garden was no longer an ally, but a labyrinth. The guards' footsteps were approaching, their heavy stilts hitting the compacted earth like drums of destiny. The guards knew, whoever enters the royal space without permission deserves a whip or death. The thief fell silent. He pressed himself against a warm wall, smelling the scent of jasmine and expensive oils that floated in the air. Then, as if pulled by an unseen force, he slipped up a stone staircase, hidden in the shadow of a colonnade. At the end of the staircase, a heavy curtain, embroidered with sacred symbols, hid the entrance to Princess.Mullissu's suite. The moment he lifted it gently, his fate was sealed. The princess sat on a lion-legged chair in an open corner of the room, the linen curtains fluttering in the evening breeze. Her hair was tied in long ponytails, braided with gold thread and lapis lazuli beads, and her robes were of shining white linen, cinched at the waist with a red sash embroidered with sacred symbols, stars, and birds of the goddess Ishtar. Thin veil fell over her shoulders, and her ankles were adorned with fine bronze rings. Behind her, a cedar-canopied litter, adorned with gold fringe and blue feathers, stood ready. When she traveled, it was carried by 4 Nubian slaves chosen for their strength and loyalty. Zabani remained motionless, mesmerized not only by the princess's beauty, but by the certainty with which she looked at him. Her eyes, almond-shaped and dark as the night before, storms, they showed no fear, but curiosity. "Who are you?" she asked, in a low, almost playful voice. He swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the back exit. A dream that went the wrong way," he whispered, with a half-smile. Mullissu chuckled. She was 20 years old and, although raised in gold and prohibitions, she longed for something more than the recitation of sacred texts and the bowing of eunuchs. The thief's beauty, with his tanned skin, sharp eyes and feline movements, had surprised her. He seemed more alive to her than all the men in the palace put together. "Hide him," she ordered shortly, and 2 nearby slaves, Ninlil and Zamu, looked at her for a moment, then bent down and pulled Zabani behind a heavy curtain, near the fragrant vessels. The guards entered with a noise. The blood offerings and punishment were red in their eyes. Princess Mullissu, we have been following an intruder. We believe he has slipped into the royal gardens. She straightened her back and smiled. With calm gestures, she raised a bronze cup and sipped slowly. No one enters my garden without permission. Maybe you dreamed it, soldiers, or maybe it's a spirit. There's only silence here. And I, with my ladies. The guards didn't have the courage to contradict her or to look further. Not after the princess had spoken. When they came out, the slaves sighed in relief. Zabani slowly rose from behind the curtain, looking at the princess. She was still smiling, but a dangerous light burned in her eyes now. Now that you have seen the palace, what will you do, dream? She asks. I will dream it again, he replied. Thus began a secret alliance, a dangerous game between a thief from the potter's quarter and a princess who wanted more than she was offered. Behind the clay walls and silk curtains, their story was just beginning. Chapter 2. Under the Seal of the Heart. Silence had fallen over the royal suite, but inside, the princess's heart was beating with a new, unknown agitation. Mullissu looked again at the young man who did not tremble, did not ask for forgiveness, did not bow. He just looked at her, as if she were not a king's daughter, but a woman. You have blind courage, or a mad soul, she said as she ran her fingers over the embroidery of her belt, avoiding his gaze for a moment. I only have eyes that see what is denied them, and they cannot turn back from their path, Zabani replied, kneeling before her, not out of submission, but out of fascination. She smiled. She was as beautiful as the goddess Ishtar on festival night, with lips as soft as pomegranates and eyes that lit embers under the skin. She approached him and, with determined gestures, placed a small clay object, sealed with gold and red wax, in his hands. It is a letter with my seal. If they catch you again, show them this. No one touches those I protect. Zabani held it in his hands as if it were a sacred treasure. His eyes sipped it, and all he wanted was to stay there with her. Tomorrow night, she continued, whispering close to his ear, come again in the royal garden, at the north gate. Ninlil will be waiting for you. But be careful, Zabani. You carry more than a seal now, you carry my secret. He touched his forehead to the back of her hand. For a moment, time stood still. Even the air seemed to be wary when Zabani emerged from the royal suite, sneaking up the same hidden staircase. In his hand, he clutched the letter with the royal seal, and at his waist the small bag, with the stolen jewels, but in his mind there was only her face. The run home was short, but charged with adrenaline. He slipped through the side streets, past the wall of the ziggurat and finally reached his hut. His father was sleeping, snoring among the unfinished clay pots. Zabani hid his bag under the mat and took out the letter under the tunic. The light of the lamp made her seal shine, a 7-rayed sun, the symbol of the royal house of Assyria. All night, Zabani did not close an eye. He lay on the mat, looking at the reed ceiling, his heart burning. He did not think of jewelry, nor of dangers. He thought only of her eyes, of the smile that promised an end and a beginning, of her name, which he said in his mind like a forbidden prayer. Mullissu, Mullissu, Mullissu. The morning had descended on Assyria with a golden light, breaking on the clay roofs and the domes of the temples. Zabani hid her bag of jewelry in her bosom and slipped out of the house, slipping through the narrow alleys to the edge of the bazaar. Under a vault of woven reeds, hung with ribbons of dyed wool, was the workshop of the most sought-after tailor in the city, Sultanabu, craftsman of noble robes and supplier to the priestly houses. Zabani discreetly tosses a gold ring onto the table covered with linen and silk threads, and old Tukultinabu raises his eyebrows, acknowledging its value. I want a garment that will turn heads. Noble, but not ostentatious. Fit for a man who walks among the gods without trembling, Zabani said with a slight smile. The tailor laughed in his beard and gave an order to his apprentices. By sunset, Zabani had what he had asked for. The garment was of fine linen, brought from Egypt, dyed a deep blue like the sky before a storm. Over the tunic he wore a short cloak of wool dyed red with dates, fastened at the shoulder with a bronze brooch in the shape of a griffin. A belt of soft goatskin, embroidered with copper and obsidian threads, marked his waist, and his sandals were new, made of gazelle skin, tied with black laces. Zabani did not look like a prince. He looked like a god descended among men. As the sun sank into the Tigris, Zabani climbed to the gate of the north of the royal palace, surrounded by high walls of burnt brick, decorated with bas-reliefs depicting winged lions and sacred bulls. A soldier with a copper helmet and a long spear stopped him, but when Zabani took out the letter with the seal of the 7-rayed sun, The guard said nothing more. He bowed deeply, as if before a palace messenger. "Wait here, sir," the soldier murmured, and immediately sent a servant inside. A few moments later, Lil, the slave girl dressed in a simple white cotton dress, appeared. She motioned for Zabani to follow her without a word. The palace was a world apart. The corridors were lit by sesame oil lamps, and the walls painted with gods and guardian spirits seemed to be watching him. The ceiling was supported by cedar beams, and the floors were covered with woven mats, soft under his feet. Every now and then, a silent servant would pass by with an alabaster tray or vases of perfume. Lil led him through a hidden passage, past an inner courtyard with a fountain, then through a portico open to the garden. And there, in the shade of a blossoming almond tree, she was waiting for him. The Princess Mullissu, dressed in a flowing dress of pale green linen, embroidered at the edges with golden lotus flowers. Her hair was left loose, shiny black waves falling to her shoulders. Around her neck she wore a necklace of small pearls and a single bronze bracelet on her left arm. When she saw him, she smiled. "I thought you might not come," she said, playing with a flower between her fingers. "And let you wait among the gods and roses?" "Not even the wind allows that," Zabani replied, slowly approaching. The garden was a sanctuary. Date, pomegranate and almond trees rose among the cobblestone alleys, and birds sang under the starry sky. Stone fountains murmured clean water in round vases, and the scents of myrrh, mint and cinnamon floated in the air. Zabani stopped in front of her. "I am here. I am no longer a thief. Not in front of you." She reached out, lightly touching the embroidery of his cloak. "Clothes don't change you, nor do words. But maybe," she looked him in the eye, "love does." And under the soft lights of the royal garden, two young people from opposite worlds began to build a forbidden but irresistible path. Chapter 3. The Kiss That Changes Destinies. Night had descended like a velvet curtain over the royal gardens of the city of Assur, and the lights of the lanterns burned shyly between the trees, bathing the faces of the two young people in a warm, almost unreal light. Zabani and Mullissu sat on a stone bench under a canopy of wild vines. The leaves rustled in the gentle wind, and from somewhere to the south, the sound of a festive flute floated like a promise. Time seemed to have forgotten them. "Have you ever been beyond the palace walls?" Zabani asked, looking at her with a gentleness that the life of a thief had never given him. She shook her head slightly. "Never. I have never even been to the temples without a full retinue and a veil to hide my face. I do not know the markets. I have not smelled the baked bread on the side of the road. I have not danced under the open sky." Then she looked at him, and in her eyes there was a window to something deep and alive. "That is why I called you, not just because you are beautiful, not just because you are brave, but because you know the city that I only see from the window. I want you to show me. Secretly, if necessary. With your eyes." Zabani, he looked at her, surprised, moved by her cruel honesty. "Do you trust me? I am a nobody, a potter's son, a thief." She touched his hand, a simple gesture, but full of noble tenderness. "You are the first man who has looked at me as a woman, not as a princess. And yes, I trust you. If I dare to escape from this golden cage, it is because you are there." Zabani closed her eyes for a moment. "I will take you wherever you want. I will show you every corner of the city, from the steps of the Temple of Assur to the grassy fields by the river. But you must know, it is dangerous. If you are discovered, the blame will fall on me too." She smiled. "I am the daughter of King Idun Sin, but I am not a prisoner of fear. I want to live. I want to breathe the air of the crowd, to taste the pomegranates in the bazaar, to see how an Akkadian child laughs. And I want to be with you." A dense silence floated between them. Then, with unexpected determination, Melissa leaned towards him. Her hand stopped on his cheek, and her lips, soft as lotus petals, pressed against his in a brief kiss, but charged with the electricity of a forbidden future. Zabani did not dare to move. It was as if the gods had frozen with him. When she broke away, the princess seemed stronger, like a silent storm that had just begun. "In 3 days," she whispered, "when my father and mother go to the sanctuary of Dur for offerings, Lil will bring you here again. Then you will be my guide, Zabani, of my soul, and perhaps of my destiny." Then she turned and, without looking back, disappeared among the stone columns, on her way to the royal apartments. Lil appeared as if from the shadows. "It is time," she said simply. Zabani followed her in silence, his heart beating like a drummer during a war ritual.